Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and I'm thrilled to bring back on the show today, podcast regular, certified clinical trauma professional, certified sex offender treatment provider, licensed professional counselor, founder of Survivor Support, podcast host of his own podcast and channel at John Uhler, LPC on YouTube, father of 3, husband to his high school sweetheart, survivor advocate, and someone you have all been requesting to come on again and again, and I'm happy to have him back, John Uhler. In case you are new here or missed John's testimony on his first episode that we did together, here is a short and brief recap of John's many accolades and credentials. His work began over 30 years ago, and the evolution of his career path is nothing short of astounding. His education includes attending Epic Bible College, Biola University, Talbot School of Theology, and California State University in Fullerton. He's worked in both clinical and administrative capacities, outpatient and hospital settings, intensive day treatment settings, residential treatment programs, and insecure facilities, including over 11 years on psychology staff within the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, where John's logged more clinical hours within solitary confinement than any psych staff in the entire United States. Prior to his work with incarcerated men, John spent years working with sexual abuse survivors and treating severely emotionally disturbed adolescents in group homes and within the largest intensive psychiatric residential treatment facility for troubled youth west of the Mississippi. When John is not providing professional therapy or podcasting, he serves in an advocacy role towards helping increase safety for vulnerable women and minors who are being placed in harm's way by those pushing dangerous ideologies, public policies, and legislation. John has been so generous as to share with us a series of episodes that are aimed at helping survivors understand what to expect from the therapeutic process from a therapist's perspective, helping other therapists understand the aspects of trauma that they were never taught in traditional university settings, such as D.I.D, ritualistic abuse, deprogramming from systematized mind control, and so much more, and giving advocates of survivors a clinical way to understand the types of trauma that are unfathomable to imagine if you haven't experienced it for yourself. We've had so many instances of survivors coming on this podcast and sharing their horror stories of trying to receive help for the side effects of the trauma they endured, and were met with closed doors, misdiagnoses, and tons of hopelessness from other therapists. John brings a refreshing perspective on healing trauma from his own experiences over the last couple decades in treating and working with clients with D.I.D. and who have experienced extreme trauma, while doing all the research that challenged John's previous beliefs about trauma and what he learned in traditional academia. We need more therapists to step up in this arena like John and take initiative, and it gives me hope for the future of therapy and therapists, knowing that therapists like John are out there giving genuine care and a thoughtful approach to each client. John shared part of his testimony the first time he was on, and ever since then, we've been diving into programming, deprogramming, and even last time John was on, we started discussing internal systems of survivors, which we will continue to discuss today. I will have John's playlist below, and I encourage you all to dig into each episode, as well as to scour and study all the free resources on his website, www.survivorsupport.net. For this episode, make sure you guys grab a pen and paper because you will need it. Each episode with John is packed with helpful information on healing for all walks of life. Before I finish introducing today's guest, I want to give just a quick reminder that if you are a survivor or a whistleblower who wants to share your story on the podcast, or if you have any information you'd love to share privately with me, you can send me an email at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com. I also have a Substack that I would love your support on, where I'm taking up journaling as an outlet for me to reflect on the podcast, guests, and my advocacy work. And you can subscribe to me there at www.emmacatherine.substack.com. All of my own social media links are linked in the show notes, and I thank you all with my whole heart for the love, support, and safety you provide to this platform and to every guest. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming back today's guest of honor, selfless man of God, voice for the voiceless, child abuse and survivor advocate, podcaster, and therapeutic warrior, the one, the only, John Uhler. John, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Emma, it's a pleasure to be back with you.
This has been a really neat series diving down this rabbit hole with you, because not only is this information when it comes to understanding the dynamics of what a survivor carries within them, this trauma that most people have never been educated on, having a clinical and more scientific way to explain this to people is so important. And I love that you interlace it with spirituality and, a lot of the stuff that you've learned, or even, the things that you learned and how to change your mind about. So I think this is so valuable for people to just have an understanding of things that are just beyond what they can comprehend. So the last time that you were on, you had this awesome presentation that you gave, and I encourage people to go back and listen to that. I know you wanted to give a little recap of what we went over last time, so I'm going to hand it over to you, and we can start diving into this and then start diving deeper into this awesome visual that you've created for us.
Good, and make sure we'll continue to keep this a dialogue, but no, I appreciate it so much. And I think from the first couple of videos, people may find this one's a little more structured. So for those that a lack of structure drives them nuts, this one will hopefully be a relief. But anyway, so in talking about trauma, again, trauma therapy is now a really well-known concept. It's well accepted in the field. So there are certifications. I am a certified trauma professional. I've paid for, I'll be going through these steps. Me smiling just then doesn't mean I'm minimizing it, but I'll be going through the steps to be a complex trauma complex trauma professional. That's an actual designation. I know it like the back of my hand. Maybe that's why I was smiling. But it'll be good because then I'll have the designation so people understand the difference between a certified trauma professional and complex trauma provider is the difference between understanding things that will cause PTSD in the here and now versus something that happened early on in childhood, typically, or layered trauma. But usually the most profound type of thing that will keep someone from being able to resolve something in the here and now is not just the degree of the trauma they experienced as an adult in the here and now, but if it's been layered on top of stuff that's been unresolved as far as past trauma, especially in childhood. There's what's called the Adversive Childhood Experiences Scale, or ACEs. A lot of doctors' offices will use that. That comes out of a study, I think about 17,000 files, client records out in the West Coast from Kaiser Permanente. And they discovered there was a relationship between early experiences and later health problems. So the body keeps the score. Again, that's a book by Bessel van der Kolk. So if someone doesn't have a chance to work through the impact, the negative impact, the lasting impact of trauma, especially through childhood, then the body will absorb it. A lot of stuff happens in the limbic system and the brain gets rewired. The good news is because of neuroplasticity, it means that the brain is still always growing neurons, that you can change things, but you can get to a point where, and most of us do, where our pathways, the circuitry becomes pretty consistent. And that's for better or for worse. So if somebody's been traumatized, their circuitry, as it were, the neural pathways will start to become consistent and not in a helpful way. The amygdala, which is kind of in the center of the brain, that is the part of our brain that deals with fear, protection, really fight, flight. That's where that comes from. So if that gets triggered enough, it can stay on. And so that causes someone then to be in an anxious state all the time. So we call that hypervigilant. So think about Army veterans as they come back from war. They have a very difficult time coming back into society. Police officers who've seen a lot of fortunate activity. Men in prison or women in prison, anybody in prison that's come out of that, they will have PTSD. And kids that have grown up in an environment where there was constant threat, constant things outside of their control. That's really the key to trauma, by the way. That a key component is it was outside of my control. So it's one thing to know you're going to go into a situation, whether football, or combat, or even an ice bath, where if you're controlling it, but if you don't know when it's going to start, when it's going to stop, then it can be traumatizing. So if you were raised in an environment where you had to walk on eggshells, right? So now we're talking about kind of the overarching concept of emotional pain. But the greater the pain, then the greater the impact. And on a scale of 1 to 10, when we're talking about trauma, if 1 is mild, trauma is in the 8s, 9s, and 10s. Usually the 9s and 10s as far as what somebody can experience. So if somebody as a child experienced very adversive experiences, it all has to do with things beyond their control. And think about kids are held hostage in a way, in this sense. They can't make the big people in their lives behave. They can't make them stop drinking. They can't make them stop abusing one another. They don't have any control over this. So they constantly are on edge. They don't know when that person's going to come into their room, burst into their room. They don't know, the next time the person's going to be drunk. But typically, if you have a raging alcoholic, they're always going to get drunk. They're always going to find a reason why. And then there's compounded issues. For instance, a couple of the items, there's just 10 items as far as adversive childhood experiences. And I'm sorry, Kaiser Permanente did a study, 17,000 files, again, looked at people that were having to undergo physical intervention or surgeries or had cancer. They started looking at backgrounds and they realized there was a correlation. So they began pouring more money into approving therapy so that hopefully it could prevent cancer or heart conditions or issues with the lungs or just all sorts of physical things. So since the body keeps the score, the more I can become aware of the impact and the potential impact things have had, then I'll be able to have a much better quality of life. That's a challenge for each of us to kind of think through in life. Am I living life or am I just surviving? Am I living life? Can I be fully emotionally present in the moment? Or am I just hanging on by my fingernails? Right? Am I just trying to make it through the day? Or am I able to find I can draw upon my resilience, my problem solving skills, my interpersonal skills? Do I have a choice? How are my boundaries? Those are some indicators to help people begin to identify whether or not they've gone through significant things that were never resolved. So they're living with trauma, which then is a perfect segue into then, as we're looking at the process of therapy for those that have been on the receiving end of the most traumatic kinds of things, the most traumatic being sexual abuse. I think most people would agree. There's now a category, as I mentioned before, there's an actual category in training material for mandated reporters. So anybody that has regular contact with minors in their job is a mandated reporter in virtually every state. So that certainly has to do with mental health professionals, doctors, attorneys, teachers, are certainly mandated reporters, coaches, clergy now in most states, which means they are mandated by law if they suspect. They don't have to investigate. But if there is a suspicion of child abuse, you must report, or if you are a mandated reporter and you fail to do that, there are both there's civil, professional, and or criminal penalties that can be brought to bear. So a mandated reporter has no choice. And that's, again, one of the dangers about the trans movement right now, because it has reframed, or it is teaching mandated reporters to not be able to identify the 9 red flag key indicators of sexual abuse. So if a child, this is an aside, but this is important. So if a child comes up to a teacher or any adult that's mandated reporter, let's say a therapist or a teacher, and says, I hate being a girl, I wish I was a boy. Well, it used to be, when it was properly taught about child abuse, suspicion of child abuse, that was the #1 red flag that a kid is being perped on. The girl doesn't want to be a girl, wants to be a boy. Why? Because the child thinks in his or her mind, if I wasn't who I am, if I wasn't a girl, if I didn't have these breasts, then I wouldn't be being perped on. So if I was a boy, then I'm safe. Or think about extreme obesity. Again, it's a protection. But now what's happened in the trans movement, and that's why the trans deception is the greatest, next to the church, next to churches, is the greatest haven for perpetrators. So if I can get adults to dumb down their intuition and say, well, it's not what it looks like. Mr. So-and-so would never do that. He's just a loving guy. He's a nice guy. He's a friendly guy. He's so supportive of kids. He's fully immersed in kids, meaning he loves kids, and so he would never. That's all perp needs. So where are you going to go? Right? You're either going to become part of a church and teach Sunday school, or become a youth director, or you're going to, or coach, or teacher, or a mentor. Those are some of the classic ones. After school safe space director. Oh my gosh. Right, for the LGBT kids. So those are just filled with perps. So I'm not phobic. The question is for people, if anybody's taken issue with that, I simply ask this. Do you want a low bar approach or a high bar approach to child protection? I'm committed to a high bar approach. Anybody that's not, I have questions why. Wouldn't we do everything we could to ensure child protection? So it's incumbent upon us to understand the red flags of perpetrators, how they operate, and then the red flags of a child that's been perpetrated upon. So those red flags will stem from trauma, or a child currently being traumatized or has been traumatized. So as we're looking then at how do you work with somebody, both from a therapeutic perspective? So if a therapist is watching this, reviewing this, I can speak clinically to them, kind of therapist to therapist. So I'll be doing that simultaneously as I'm talking to those that are either in therapy and maybe find themselves frustrated, find that therapy just seems to not be going anywhere, or it's quagmired down, it's at a stalemate. They're not getting anything out of it. Now, again, part of that may be the person's own resistance. It's very understandable, but it may be that you have a competent therapist, but you've put the brakes on. Okay, so it's important to kind of look at, because it's going to be very typical, very normal, quite frankly. Okay. Or you're someone that isn't quite sure whether or not therapy is for you, or you need therapy, or is this something you should pursue? So we looked at that kind of extensively. Now, though, briefly, again, in looking at trauma therapy, but especially the most extreme effects of the most extreme kind of trauma, and that would be ritualistic abuse. And I'm sorry, that's an actual category now. So when somebody who's a mandated reporter goes through their annual training, really every other year, so any mandated reporter in any field has to, in order to be recertified or relicensed, per their field. They have to have continuing education units, most of them, but they have to have child abuse training again. So recently in the actual literature, in the training PowerPoint slides that any mandated reporter will review, especially in Pennsylvania, because that's what I reviewed, but I'm going to assume it's pretty much all over now, meaning it's ubiquitous, it's all throughout the US, that part of the categories of abuse, so you have physical abuse, you have mental abuse, mental or emotion, you have neglect, you have elder abuse, then you have sexual abuse, and then you have what's called ritualistic abuse. So it's a real bona fide term now. So if anybody hears, if anybody is on the receiving end of somebody poo-pooing, ritualistic abuse, sorry, it's in the training. It's so understood now. Now, again, what is ritualistic abuse? In order to understand SRA, you have to understand ritualistic abuse. Okay. Ritualistic abuse is abuse that happens on a regular and frequent basis and a consistent basis, that you have access, the perp has access to the child and is perping on the child in a consistent, meaning ongoing way, to where it starts to become predictable, meaning what they're going to do. So either it's going to stay exactly the same, never does. How can I say that? I've worked with sex offenders for 15 years, worked in the Department of Corrections for 11 years, had access to all the criminal records. Okay, I've done a deep dive into a whole lot of stuff. And that's why no academic who wants to kind of poo-poo some of this stuff, no academic researcher will debate me. Okay. At best, and I'm not downplaying academic researchers. Okay? And a lot of them do fine work. But there's a big difference between being able to have access to somebody who's sexually offended, who's in prison. That's where you're going to do the research. You're not going to be able to do research, by the way, with anybody who will admit to, and nobody admits, but where are you going to find somebody who's sexually offended that's willing to talk about it? Only in prison or on parole, because prior to that, they're not going to admit because they'd be in parole. They'd be in prison. They didn't want to be arrested. Okay. So the only time you're ever going to get any information from someone who is sexually offended is once they're involved in the criminal justice system. And now the question is, how are you going to get information from them? How are you going to interview them? You either interview them from the outside, academic researcher. Well, how much time do you get with them? And in what context? You're going to interview them in a room, in a prison. It takes a long time. It takes about 4 to 5, 6 months to prepare for that, to get approved for that. And then how many hours do you get? Maximum 3 to 5. Okay, so you have your list of questions. And the guy knows he's being listened to, or he has a guard, but it's all speaker system. There are no secrets in prison. And so they're interviewing the world's greatest liars. And now the question is, how much objective information are you going to get? So some of the research that has been published about perps, especially, and this is sort of common fare, and then I'll come back to the process that we're going to look at, but this will be important. We have come to believe urban myths about perpetrators because the perpetrators have fed the researchers the information they want the researchers to publish. Why? Because published research will begin to influence public policy, public sentiment, and legislation and judicial decisions, how much time a guy gets. So if I'm a perp and I can help influence people to feel sorry for me so that I don't have to do time, or I can horse trade and bargain away and plea deal away, instead of doing time, I'll go on probation, or I do probation instead of time, be viewed as low risk rather than high risk. Perps have a vested interest in this. So they will feed, and they're practicing for parole. They're seeing if the interviewer buys it, by the way. So if anybody's heard that perps hurt people, so perps are perping upon the age of the kids that they themselves were perped on because they are subconsciously working out their own trauma. That is a lie. Everybody needs to understand that, because if, and this is part of the healing process, you'll always run into, or at some point in time within yourself, there's going to be an internal debate as to what extent could the perp have helped himself, or to what extent should you feel sorry for him, aligning with the aggressor. Because after all, hurt people hurt people. That is not true, by the way. Hurt people don't hurt people. Selfish people hurt people. And if somebody knew what it felt like to be perped on, why are they dishing it out to somebody else? That's different than child on child. But the sophisticated perps, how do I define that? A lot of victims over a long period of time finally got busted. They're usually mandated reporters. They're in some field. And you look at the expression or the response by people around them. That's going to tell you whether or not he was sophisticated or not. If the people around them say, it's about time, he was a creepy guy, everybody, like, I couldn't believe he wasn't arrested sooner. Okay, that's not as sophisticated. Okay, but if everybody's surprised and come to their defense, the perp's defense, that can't be. No, not him. I cannot believe it. How did everybody get fooled? How about Jeffrey Epstein? He's a sophisticated perp. He's more sophisticated than Clinton, by the way. Right? Everybody knows, right? Everybody rolls their eyes about Bill Clinton, like, oh, yeah, of course he wants to be in charge of the internship program, right? Bill's going to do what Bill's going to do. So that's not even sophisticated as well. He just leverages power. Okay. So with the perps, it's really important to understand, I segued a little, that nobody perps in a sophisticated way, and this has to do with SRA and MK Ultra. None of the people that hurt you were perped on. Now, let me qualify that just for a moment. That's different than them getting a kid to perp on you. That's different. But the people that were calling the shots, they weren't perped on. Yeah, let that sink in. How can I know? Because the question is, why would they want to dish out on others what was done to them? And here's even a better question. Think about a survivor. As a matter of fact, people listening to the sound of my voice, so to speak, people that are tuning in, they're survivors. And again, it's different than what happened as kids. It's really important to differentiate this. Let's say once somebody turns certainly 18, maybe 15, and that's different than, okay, there's so many contingencies, but let me just say this. There reaches a point in time where somebody really does have a decision, and we're going to get into this, okay, as far as the internal process, and also there is forgiveness and all that. But think about the ones that put you in that position. That's really important. Think about the shot callers, the ones that were organizing this whole thing, the ones that were organizing it all, the ones that really created the dynamic within you that you had to cement. They were not sexually abused. Okay, how can I prove it? Okay, with a survivor, generally speaking, the one characteristic over anything else of a survivor is they are hypervigilant in terms of being overly protective of kids. They're not exploitive of kids. That's different, though, just for the sake of calming some people down right now. I say that respectfully. You know, if somebody's holding a gun to your head and making you do something, whether signing a contract or doing something else, you're not doing it of free will. But think about those that were calling the shots. Do you think somebody was holding a gun to their head? No. They were arranging all of this. So they wanted to do it. How about Jeffrey Epstein? Do you think Jeffrey Epstein was an abused kid? Do you think Bill Clinton? Do you think Bill Gates? They've never been abused in their lives. That's different. Did they have perfect childhood? Nobody had a perfect childhood. But why don't I go out if I had the money? Let's say somebody gave me the same amount of money. Why don't I get into child trafficking? Very simple. Because people that care aren't exploitive. People that are empathic aren't exploited. Survivors are protective, not exploitive. Somebody who's exploitive wants to, and they get a thrill out of it, and they get a high out of it. So therein lies the difference. So the ones that were organizing and calling the shots within the SRA and the MK Ultra, they have never been perked on. They're just evil. They're just deviant. They've harmonized with evil a number of times in scripture where it talks about that evil has made its home within them. And so that's really important to know, because if the last thing we want, the most typical thing that we'll have to combat on the inside, anybody will, is misplaced sympathies. Okay, so the reality is this: you don't want to give a perpetrator the benefit of the doubt. You don't want to believe that the perpetrator cares. That's part of that, going through that process of deprogramming or decompressing, right? And to heal, you have to come to terms with the truth. Only the truth will set you free. So the people that did this to someone did it because they wanted to do it for no other reason, and for their own benefit. Sexual gratification, monetary gratification. They're evil, they're psychopaths.
And
Let
do
me
you
come
mind
back.
ask
Yeah.
you real quick, and this would be outside of the realms of, say, these generational families where that literally is sort of passed down generation to generation. They all go through like that same trauma. You're talking about people that weren't in those systems, that aren't under mind control their whole lives, and that end up doing this, right? Yeah.
Right now, let me speak to that, because it's probably time, and just for a moment we'll speak to it. And this will stir some people up, and that's okay. I just want people to at least ponder this, right? Understandably, some people right now may be shutting down. Just kind of stay with me for a second, because ultimately the goal of this talk, the goal of this series is freedom. That's all, right? You'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So you need to know the truth. What will freedom do? It will enable you to experience what Jesus said in John chapter 14. I'm going to give you a gift that the world can't give you, a gift of peace. He's going to give us his peace. Once I experience his peace, I can rest. Psalm 91:1, he who remains under the shadow of the Almighty will remain stable and fixed. That's emotional maturity, by the way. If I'm stable and fixed, that means I'm not knocked off my square. I'm not emotionally reactive, borrowing that term from Murray Bowen of extended family systems therapy. The entire system of someone who has not been able to go through the process of healing is emotionally reactive. That's why the ups and downs. The goal is, now, it's a tall order, but it's possible. Either that or God didn't know what he was talking about. The goal is for me to be able to get to a point where I have peace, I can rest, and I am stable and fixed. I'm not knocked off my square. I'm not emotionally reactive, and I'm stable. And I am governed by the fruits of the Holy Spirit. Love, joy. Joy is not happiness. Joy is stability when all hell's breaking loose, by the way. Love, joy, peace. A peace that passes all understanding, that will guard our heart and our mind. It doesn't say, unless you're an SRA or MK Ultra survivor, then you're on your own and God doesn't know what to do with you. And his power is powerful up to that point, but the MK Ultra people were too powerful for God. It doesn't say that, right? That's not towards you, Emma. I just really want people to understand. So here's my perspective on somebody that the multi-generational programming. There's a difference between someone who is in that multi-generational system versus the people that put them in it. Number one, the people that put them in it are evil perpetrators. The rest became, everybody's going to have to stay with me, but here's the reality. You became part of a cult. They controlled you. As you got older, are you responsible for what you did? Yes. and no. It's reality. You have to be okay with both because both require a different ointment for that wound. To the extent that you had a choice, then 1 John 1:9, if we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to forgive us our sins, cleanse us from all unrighteousness. I don't have to be saddled with the guilt. That's going to take discernment, because usually what happens is this, and I'm going to make the case for it as we start to get into the chart. And it's exactly in a way what Jesus addressed in these two different passages. If anybody loved father and mother more than me, siblings, houses, and land, he piles it all in. They're not worthy of me. It's the human propensity for us to want connection. And if I'm not careful, I can make an idol of my family relationships. And I'll do whatever it takes to stay connected. So whether in a dysfunctional family or all the way up to a cult-like structure, a part of me is placing that relationship higher than anything. And I'm ensnared by that, meaning I'll do whatever it takes to obey. Why? It's either because of fear, and it's usually a combination, fear of and in hope that. So to the extent that I've been trying to gain acceptance, approval, I was willing to do anything, I have to come to terms with that. I certainly sacrificed myself. I sacrificed my future, my hope, not my whole future, but think about what I sacrificed, including I may have sacrificed somebody else in hopes that what? I'll get a blessing. I'll get recognition. Okay, so I have to come to terms with that. That's some hard truth, but I have to, because only truth is going to set us free. To the extent that I did it out of fear, God understands. And I have to be willing to take all those troubled feelings and that intensity, and we'll work through that in time. Okay. And that's where the Stockholm syndrome comes in. Okay. So it's a combination of both. But to first understand the difference between the outsiders that were really the ringleaders or the shot callers that are keeping that family line going versus those in the cult. To the extent that I had no choice, God understands, but that's by varying degree, and only the person can discern. The younger the child, the less control they had. But there comes a point in time, this is part of the hard truth, but this is where each of us need to wrestle. There comes a point in time that I really knew the difference between right and wrong. And I was choosing me or somebody else over the person I was harming. I have to wrestle with that. Why? Because a part of me is trying to tell me to come to terms with that. Now, what do I do with that guilt? There's a difference between true and false guilt. False guilt is shame that comes from somebody else's responsibility. I have to place that where it belongs. We talked about knapsacks. But if I got to a point where I could have done something else and I chose not to, then I'm responsible for that. And I have to come to terms with that. But it doesn't negate the part of me that was held hostage. So there's a lot to unpack, and that's where working with the different parts or alders comes in. But the generational bloodline, I guess that speaks to that. So someone carried on. The question is this: at what point in time did you stop? And the question is why? Something happened. So you stopped it. And you wouldn't be listening to this program, or maybe you've tuned in, but all things being equal, if you're part of a bloodline, multi-generation, the question is, why are you listening to Emma's program? because you're probably not wanting to be a part of that. You you extricated yourself. So guess what you did? You stopped the multi-generational process. Well, if it was helpless, if it was sealed, signed, sealed, delivered, if you had no choice, then why are you listening to this? Because this is the very last program. Emma's is the very last channel you should be tuning into, right? Because it's giving you all sorts of information. You're breaking the hold that has on you. So you're showing that somebody else in a previous generation could have done this exact same thing. Now, somebody might say, well, Emma's program wasn't on. Okay, but the concept, then how do you know to tune into this? And give yourself some credit, right? If all we know is what we saw, which is not true, but think about it, but it has a huge impact. So Murray Bowen calls it the multi-generational transmission process. So from one generation to the next, absolutely. And it gets worse as far as dysfunction, okay? So we're typecast in a way. That's where we end up rules and roles and we inherit all that stuff. But the question is this. For the people that are watching and listening right now, so here's the challenge, and I guess the answer to that question. If it is, how do we want to put it? Whether a spell, whether forecast, whether written in stone, so the bloodline, why are you listening to this program? Because aren't you disrupting that natural flow? Think about the process that has gone into you, in essence, have said the buck stops here. Okay. Either you're somehow intellectually brighter than than your parents and grandparents and go up the line. Either you got more on the ball than them, or the question is, since given what you experienced and what you saw, you would have every excuse to continue. Why did you stop? Because you're in the bloodline. Why don't you do to your kid? Because a part of you said what? So now it's all about truth. We are going to treat people with honor and respect, sort of, but just go with this. So we're going to honor your parents to the extent, okay. So we're going to treat them as capable as they indicated they are and they said they are, okay. So they're not deficient or intellectually handicapped. Okay, so how did you know to stop? You said the buck stops here. I ain't passing on this crap. But look what you experienced. The same thing that your parent experienced. So you didn't know any better than your parent knew. But why are you stopping it? There's only one reason. Your conscience. By choice, because you care enough. Ergo, case can be made, and we're going to make the case, your parent didn't care enough. I'm not saying they're good, bad, or indifferent, but the question is, to what extent are they right? To what extent are they wrong? They passed their knapsack on to you. You need to give their knapsack back. So every generation was passed along this knapsack. So whether SRA or a classic alcoholic dysfunctional family, somebody finally has to say, you know what, regardless of my hurt, this ain't right. I ain't doing this to somebody else. Would God excuse us away for doing anything other than saying, I'm not doing this? So everybody listening to your program is doing the right thing. They put the brakes on. Well, if you're doing it, couldn't your mother have done it if she cared enough? Yeah, but don't excuse it away. Isn't she capable? Didn't she tell you how capable she was? She dished it out. She told you all sorts of things. Intellectually compromised or deficient people can't be capable one moment and deficient the next. You didn't see it modeled, stopping the whole thing. The one thing you're doing is the right thing, and your mother or father didn't choose to do it. It doesn't make them bad, but it made them wrong. Quite frankly, it made them a coward, and that should tick you off. Well, that means your grandparents could have done this. Meaning you're doing ultimately what is right, just, and fair. You're doing ultimately what is reasonable. To not do this, to continue, would be unreasonable at best. Well, why didn't your mother do this? Because I'll tell you what, at the very least, she was unreasonable and she cared more about herself than you. The reason you're not doing it is you don't want to pass it along to your kids. Who told you that? Look at what you saw. So ready? You should feel really good about yourself. The fact that you've decided the buck stops here. I ain't passing along this crap. Why didn't your parents say it? Why didn't your grandparents say it? Because they were cowards at best. Doesn't make them bad, but they were cowards. You need to be able to hold them accountable. It doesn't mean go and beat the hell out of them. It just simply means this. Understand that at the end of the day, we all have choices. And whether bloodline or dysfunctional family based upon Murray Bowen's in extended family systems therapy, where he calls it the extended family transmission process, where you just have dysfunction traveling down. At some point in time, somebody has to say the buck stops here. Everybody can say, well, I didn't know any better. Really? That's where conscience comes in, right? There comes a point in time where I enter into adulthood. So that's the easiest thing, or maybe the easiest thing, a perfect transition now back to this. It's easiest to say this. We're not talking about kids. We're not even talking about young adolescents. But at some point in time, people will make a choice. Now, as far as harming somebody else, that's what I'm talking about. I reach a point where if somebody puts a knife in my hand, whatever point we can agree on, people can drive in the US at age 16. Would we say that they're adult enough to make a decision whether or not to slice somebody's throat or stab somebody in the heart? Age 18, meaning at what point in time will I say, you know what, regardless of internal or external pressure, what am I going to do? If a voice inside of me is saying, take my vehicle and run it through a crowd in Times Square where I can kill 8,000 people, does it matter about my bloodline? I have a choice. And so that's where it's really important for us to work through all these different issues. But the nice thing is, when we're talking about kids and early teens, when it comes to harming someone else, God understands. That's what's nice, and we can take heart in that. I'm going to let people process that. We're going to do sort of a question and answer. If anybody has, let this percolate. I'm not saying this is easy. It's okay if you disagree. Submit questions to Emma, and we'll tackle these questions. So my goal, I don't have to be right. I need to be right. Meaning I want to be exact, but only the truth is going to set us free. And I do know that God will hold us accountable for the extent to which I can make independent decisions. He doesn't say unless you come from a certain kind of family. He doesn't say that. What he said is, I didn't come to bring peace but a sword, setting it at odds. Father, parents and children, in-laws and outlaws, right? So I think he certainly knows that there is a propensity for us to align ourselves with family. And what he has said is, we cannot have any other gods before him. We cannot place another relationship, especially if that relationship is requiring me to do what is wrong. So that'll be a process of each of us going before the Lord. And really the whole process of healing is, remember, removing knapsacks that are not mine. That means I had no control. Somebody put something on me, now I have to give it back. I'm placing responsibility where it belongs, but also accepting responsibility. And that's always very specific. And when I had a choice, if I didn't have a choice, genuinely, then I didn't have a choice. But there comes a point in each person's life, right? If someone's holding a gun to my head, says you either rape this kid or die, I'm going to say pull the trigger. I mean, honestly, are we going to rape the kid? I'll tell you what, then I'm selfish. That means I care about my own life more than the kid. No greater love has anyone than he do what? Lay down his life on behalf of someone. The good news is God can help us discern all that. And if you were a part of something like that as an adult, it's really important to know that God's grace and forgiveness covers everything. Okay, so there is no more condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. But we have to confess. And then we have to dedicate ourselves to finding out what happened. How did I get to a point where I was willing to do that? And one thing is probably true. This part is not for condemnation, but you probably hadn't taken the time to begin the process of looking at what's under the surface. And therefore, you were still easily manipulated, groomed, easily triggered. So now you're doing the right thing. All of us were beginning that process. Boy, did I dump a lot. Do you have any other questions? And that's such a
No, I appreciate you. It's good to understand this element of it for people, whether they were in, one of these families or not, and it's even when we look at, somebody like, I'll use the examples you did, like Bill Clinton, there's also rumors that he was potentially a Manchurian candidate and was mind controlled, throughout his life, so looking at
I can actually tell you, Emma, he wasn't. And we'll go into that sometimes. I can tell you the characteristics of a psychopath or somebody that was mind controlled, but I'll just, for the record.
Yeah, psychopath too. Yes. 100%. Yeah.
He and Hillary and Obama.
Yeah.
Right there.
But all this stuff is so good for people to understand, because that's always the question, why and how did somebody do this, especially for those people who walked away, no matter what age it was. If they were able to do it, it's so confusing to think, why didn't somebody before me do this? Why didn't my siblings? Why didn't my mom? Why didn't my dad? So I love that you're talking about these things, because it's empowering, like you said, for people to realize that it wasn't their fault, that there was knapsacks thrown on them, and that, the parents didn't have the same will inside of them, in a sense, or courage to leave, and that eventually and at some point people do have a choice to make. There's always free will, even if somebody's completely unaware that, maybe they're under mind control. I know some people that I've talked to that didn't wake up from their mind control until 60, 70 years old. So trying to contend with all of that and having so many years of, sort of being enslaved to this and not even knowing, it's really good to be able to break down like how this happens, how perpetration happens. Like you said, psychopathy, that's something we're not taught. So I think this is empowering. It helps people take those knapsacks off and helps them contend with that guilt and shame, and to realize like what's theirs to carry and what's not, and to also be able to humanize the people that abused them, and to try to contend why somebody would do that without leaving. So I really appreciate you, talking about all of this, because it's confusing, but it can also be a really healing part of somebody's journey to understand these different dynamics.
If you saw my eyes, I was trying to bring up, I don't think I have it on this computer, but down the road, what we'll do is we'll talk about the healing process, what is involved. Now, we're going to be talking about the process of therapy, but then we'll talk about some of the key elements. I have a lot of graphics for that one as well, but what I'd recommend if people want to look in advance and really to help their own therapy along, to help their own processing along, is review the series that I've been working on. The original series, I'm going to be picking it up on survivorsupport.net under the podcast tab. Scroll all the way down. For 2 years, I was working on, and I've done sort of a parenthetical time, the issue of forgiveness, what it is versus what it is not. That's really important for people to go through. But the issue of boundaries. Okay, and some of the graphics I'm going to show are actually shown that's from my Friday night podcast. So I would recommend, if somebody wants to really help their own process of healing, which ultimately should show itself in boundaries, right? Everything comes down to boundaries, unless you live on a tropical island by yourself. Okay, so as long as you have to have people, boundaries are synonymous with knapsacks. So if somebody crosses your boundaries, they've taken your responsibility and placed it on you. So now you've got two knapsacks. You should only have one. So everybody needs one knapsack, no more, no less. So whether in normal human interactions or in SRA or MK Ultra, the concept is somebody took their responsibility to do what is right, just, and fair, and they were unjust, not right, and they were unfair. So they ladened you with knapsacks. And so they were guilty. You have assumed their guilt. And that's why false guilt is really shame. And shame, there's no release from a shame-based identity. And all the heat-seeking missiles that are being shot out to punish true guilt, because you've absorbed somebody else's responsibility, it's shooting out towards them. It's a God-given mechanism, meaning that's the anger. And all of a sudden it detects the wrong, but you have accepted the guilt. It's going after the true guilt. Well, they took their guilt, put it on you. So that heat-seeking missile does what? It goes out and does this big arc and comes back at you. So that's that self-condemnation. So you're giving you're giving to you what the perp deserves. And what are you giving the perp? Actually, what you deserve. So you're excusing them away. You're attributing all sorts of, you're being gracious to them. You're attributing the best case scenario. You're saying, well, I know what it looks like, but it's really not that. They don't understand what they're doing. Oh, would you ever say that about you? No, you never say that. You say, should know better. I knew better. Look at me. I'm a slob. So you're putting all the guilt on you and none on them. Let's just even it out. So that's part of therapy as well. So that's why boundaries are so important. And the issue of responsibility is so important, genuine responsibility. And only the truth will be able to help us discern that. And once we know the truth will set us free. And that's when the generational stuff can stop. So Murray Bowen, if anybody's familiar with him, great. My favorite term in the whole wide world came from him, which is emotional reactivity. And what he described as, he said, to the extent that someone isn't mature, hasn't grown, hasn't found themselves, hasn't been able to become emotionally free because they're still tied in with the family system, he said that they will have a false sense of self. Now, isn't that applicable for everybody? Right? Because if you're the victim of MK Ultra or ritualistic abuse, you never had a chance to establish a sense of self. It got all buried. So the question is, how are we going to find you? They layered all sorts of stuff on top of you. So we have to do treasure hunting. I've never used that term. We got layers of the onion. We got to get all this crap off of you. And really all the crap is lies to find the core you so that you have a chance to grow into the you should have been able to grow into. And that you has rebar in its spine, in his or her spine, that you has creativity, has a sense of purpose, has a sense of direction, has resilience. That's inside of you. So we have to get all the crap off. There's a theological term. But Murray Bowen said, to the extent from one generation to the next, if one generation doesn't say, you know what, buck doesn't stop here, it's going to keep transferring it. So the sense of self, this is even before SRA or MK Ultra, the sense of self keeps getting less, meaning I'm a shell of a person because I didn't even have a chance to develop myself. Why? Because I was so focused on trying to take care of or pacify my caregivers. So instead of looking forward, I was always having to look metaphorically backward to try to please them or pacify them, to try to keep the anxiety down. And so Murray Bowen talked about, to the extent that I didn't have a chance to become a complete self, is the extent to which I will be emotionally reactive. And that concept is, and you see it when I have buttons or triggers. Okay, isn't that interesting? We've used the term trigger. Okay, what does trigger mean? It's like knee-jerk reaction. I mentioned this in a previous episode, right? You go to the doctor, you're sitting on the table, and he taps with the rubber hammer. He taps your knee, and what happens? Boop! You can't even stop that. So it's just very automatic. So if you ever have automatic reactions, that means something has been impressed upon you. So whether SRA, MK Ultra, or how about somebody that's just grown up in a really whacked out home, when they get triggered because they had to go for Christmas and somebody said that term or used those certain phrases or said that certain thing, you watch the person, you watch the victim, the person that's being pelted by all these things. They're going to become compulsive because they're going to have to keep a lid on truth, by the way. So they'll do one thing or the other. So tension is coming up. So, by the way, dysfunctional family is one that is tension reducing, but never tension resolving. So a Band-Aid approach to my life will simply be tension resolving. The answer is having a complete sense of self. But emotional reactivity is in knee-jerk-like fashion. It's as though I don't even have a choice. When I get triggered, I either escalate or I suddenly shut down. Ready? I'm gonna snap my fingers that fast. Well, haven't I just described in the extreme, in a way, switching with D.I.D or MK Ultra? And that's, you know what, I didn't anticipate kind of doing this tangential thought, but hopefully this would be helpful because I want to give SRA and MK Ultra survivors hope in this sense. Though the pain and the methods and what they did to you is unique above all else. The process, though the valley you will go through is as deep as the Grand Canyon, where somebody else will have to go down a ravine. Okay, your pain and the intensity will be much more severe. The process and the goal of healing is the same. That's important to know because that means there's hope. If you follow the roadmap, you're going to be able to get out of the Grand Canyon. So the good news is, because you were either victimized by MK Ultra or SRA, it doesn't mean you're the exception and that God doesn't know what to do with you and there's no hope. It means you follow this roadmap and you'll get out, which is beautiful because that already means the power they had over you and what they told you and what they impressed upon you. A big chunk just fell off like an ice shelf in the Arctic. Remember, they go and they do tours of Alaska, and all of a sudden that big chunk falls down. I just gave you something to help the big chunk. It means this: you're not consigned to this the rest of your life unless they put a physical electrode or a chip. Then you don't need therapy, you need surgery. Okay, that's what everybody really needs to understand. That now I'm aware of, and there were some comments previously. Again, I'm aware of, chemtrails and everything matters. But at the end of the day, either something mechanically, electronically, well, you don't need therapy. I need to be shielded from that or get that out. Then you'll be fine. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's really rare in my estimation, which is good news. Right? If they put a chip in you, why are you going to therapy? Meaning if they have a little lever or a button, they're just like playing a video game. Don't go to therapy. You need surgery. You need surgery first, then probably therapy. But if somebody can tweak something electronically, they can do a dial, they can do a lever, you're never going to get out. So get it out. Right? I'm not right. And there are probably people that's happened to. That's like Mission Impossible stuff. If somebody put one of those little timers in your brain with the flip of a switch, it's going to blow your brains up and your eyes are going to bleed. You need surgery. But then you need to find out, is it true surgery? So it can seem like you need surgery, but all things being equal, what I want to tell the vast majority of SRA and MK Ultra is this. As we mentioned before, you're not programmed and you don't have anything inside you. Now, in case you do, then you need surgery. You were left with an incredible impression or you were persuaded. And we are in the process now of helping counter that with truth. So now to bring it back around to the process. There we go. Gosh, I'm sorry that was circumlocution, but hopefully that helps, because the question is, how does this process start? And so the very first part of the process is understanding there's hope. You're not consigned to this for life. If something was implanted in you, you need to get that out. But the rest is a battle for the mind. And so that's what this is all about, this process. Emma, any questions on this? I know I did circumlocution again. But...
No, that was good. Thank you so much for sharing all of that.
Okay. And again, this really should stir people up. I don't do it to stir people up, but I want people to at least ponder the possibility. Because really the premise I'm suggesting is you can get out of this to where they don't have control over you anymore. Where you don't have to look over your shoulder anymore. Look at Carrie Elahi.
She's a
That does
warrior.
me, right? I mean, it's going to take still, years, but that just like a rape survivor or anybody that's come out of a very difficult thing. But there's a big difference between being controlled versus having to work through trauma. So the big piece about MK Ultra and satanic ritual abuse is the question is, do they still have control? Do they have control of some levers and dials or curses? Okay. I'm here to tell you they don't. And if a part of you, understandably, but just for anybody that's listening, if a part of you says, no, they do, then you can turn this off right now. I don't have hope for it, of course, right? But I mean, if you are convinced, now I hope you stay with me, but if somebody could do something to you where they can have a lever, then you're a puppet. You're like, a little remote control race car or something. That's not freedom, and you'll never get out of that. But I tell you what, if you go up to that race car and pull out the electronic device, and guess what? They can be flipping the lever. So if you literally think that something was implanted in you, then you need somebody to take that out. But you're shy of it, then we're not talking from the outside in. Now it is the inside in. That's where there's hope, because you can get out of this. Okay, so the process of therapy then, as we reviewed, or as we covered, it really starts with kind of what we've been talking about, awareness and recognition of the symptoms. Even us talking about this, has it triggered something? It's probably reminding you that you are reactive in some way. There's a lot of different symptoms. We covered that. One of the biggest things is dissociation. So the things to notice about yourself is, have people ever described you as, have you ever noticed that you are very changeable in terms of mood throughout the day? Do you go through periods of time where you can't recollect? You have no recollection of what happened during the day. And do you have internal voices from the inside in? Also handwriting. Have you ever noticed that there's different kind of writing? Do you notice in your closet, I can't talk, closet, you'll have clothing that's different style than you would ever wear? You'd never wear that kind of stuff, but it's still in your closet. Do you notice that you change your clothes? This is typically true for more for women. Do you tend to run late because you are changing your clothes a lot and hairstyle? And do you change your hairstyle depending upon mood? That could even be in the moment. I was working with somebody that in group therapy, and actually another group member had noticed this. And Sylvia, I forget, the gentleman, Jack. Yeah. Jack said, oh, I forget what we were talking about, what topic, but all of a sudden Jack interrupts. He says, oh, here goes Sylvia. Here goes the strong Sylvia. He didn't know about this. Jack was just a client in for depression. So this is a multi gender group. And Jack had noticed that whenever Sylvia would become very assertive, she would sit up on the couch, cross her legs Indian style, and take her hair, long hair, and twist it and put it in a bun or whatever, with the little comb thing. I didn't even notice that. And so he noticed this ebb and flow. So when the um, powerful or assertive Sylvia would come out, her hairstyle would change. It would match. So a lot of consistency with that. So those would be some pretty good indicators. Also, do you get lost without GPS? That's different than your directionally challenged versus if you didn't have your GPS. Have you ever noticed there are times that you can't even remember where you're going and you don't even almost know why? You just awaken, you come to, and you're at a stoplight or you're at a stop sign and you don't know where you are. Or have you ended up in places you don't know why? Okay, so the DSM would call that amnesic or amnestic fugue. I just think that another part is taken over and another part drove you someplace. So you look at the indicators and are you aware and do you begin to recognize those? And if so, then the next step would be risking to believe in the concept of dissociation. And that simply means part of you is, uh, for a time, you're not there. Your body's there, but another part of you has taken over. You have gaps in your memory because of that, but the part of you that was out has those memories and feelings, but the feelings have triggered probably a lot of adrenaline. You feel that as anxiety, so you have free-floating anxiety. You can't identify why, but there are gaps in memory. So short-term and long-term, most people, again, should be able to remember back to about first grade or age 5, generally speaking. But if you have huge gaps of memory, then that you need to look at that. Risk believing that the internal systems don't make you, or I'm sorry, internal symptoms. So the voices, also in case you see something. So oftentimes, depending upon the trauma, you will actually see parts. Right? You'll see alters, you'll see people. Okay. And that is not demonic, by the way. Now, it could at times, yeah, but we're not going to go there. For our purpose of our discussion, not only will you hear the voices, and it'll really be they're either talking to you, behind you, or above you. So they're having full-blown conversations, and you find yourself either listening to a conversation between two parts, or they're really talking to you, and you're trying to maintain yourself, either responding back or not responding. And you have to risk believing that it doesn't make you crazy. You have to risk. So then the next step, so you can believe, meaning you can see the progression here that, okay, I can't explain away, I can't ignore these indicators, these symptoms, and then on the inside, I have to risk believing it's really true, and it's not me being crazy. And then I have to, and here's the big thing, as we started to talk about last time, I have to risk taking the step of communicating with the internal parts. That's the biggest beginning step. That's what freaks everybody out. Now, I'm not laughing. None of this is right, but that's right because you're now taking the step. I always recommend you start, well, even to right now. Okay. If you've been hanging in there with me right now and listening, right, you've already now been hearing stuff more than likely. Okay. There's a reason why you're hearing something. They're either telling you to turn the thing off or they're telling you to listen to John. Right? It has something to do with the content that we're talking about. Okay. And then, so don't ignore that and then begin the process of journaling. That's really the key thing. And where do you start? You're going to get a notebook, you're going to get a journal, you're going to write the question, what did anybody think about what John said? And now the question is, do you want a response? Now, don't worry, that's not the power suggestion. You're going to have a response because I just said, do you want one? Because right now you don't want a response because you're normal, right? Because that may freak you out. But the question is, how badly do you want to know? Are you open to it? And what would you do if you actually found out that some part of you, because nobody will have access to this journal, some part of you actually responds. In about 3 days, go back and look at the journal. What are you going to do? If you're going to say, that freaks me out, I'm not doing this anymore, do you really think they're going to respond? because they know you better than you know them. And we have to solve that. No, not solve, because your goal is to get to know them as well as they know you. And you have to earn their trust, because right now they don't trust you because you keep going away on them. Okay. And then do you really want to know? So I just referenced that, and then getting to know the parts. So that's kind of where we left off last time. So Emma, any thoughts? And we'll bring up the chart right now.
Let's do it. I just enabled screen share a couple minutes ago, so you should be able to access that.
Okay. And let me go to that. So I've added to the chart even since we last were discussing this. Okay, I'm going to minimize this chart. Ooh, that's a lot too. Okay, this is done on a Word document. That's about the extent of my graphics ability. So that's why the cursor is, every now and then you see the cursor here. Okay, so I've added a little bit of color again, differentiate in terms of background. This is ultimately your system. This is an internal system. Everybody's will be fine-tuned and different in terms of details. But generally speaking, I'm giving you, it's not that I'm giving it, but I really I felt compelled, and Emma, you and I together, I thought this is the right thing at the right time. Eventually I'll do some writing about this. So here is an overview of an internal system. And therapy then, the process of therapy is working from the top down. But during that process, there will be, especially way down here, if you see the little square, the little green square, okay, every now and then what'll happen, the more you go, what I call drilling for oil, so you're going to start moving towards what the truth is. It's also, if I could draw this like strata in the soil. So let's say this was a side view of a hillside or a mountain. So right here, we're up on top of the mountain, and there's been an earthquake and a landslide, and all the land fell away. I would actually draw a bunch of different strata in here. Okay. So using that idea of strata, let's say there's a pool of oil down here. The goal is you're going to end up sending a drill down all the way down to the pool of oil, which represents pain. Okay. So you want to lance the wound. There's another example, kind of like a bone infection. So you're going to eventually start to go deeper and deeper. Let's say also that using that same idea of topography and strata, let's say we had a little bulldozer up there. Maybe I should put a picture of that. But let's say that bulldozer or land scraper, so heavy equipment, just started little by little, we're scraping away layers of earth. And let's say, as a matter of fact, let's say down here there was, I'm just going to make this up, but let's say this was helium or something that wanted to come up. I mean, there's pressure, pounds per square inch, and it's wanting to come to the surface. Well, it's being able to be maintained by this amount of weight or pressure going downward. So it has more pounds per square inch going down as this, and it's really the truth, quite frankly, and pain. So it's wanting to come up. So as long as somebody comes into therapy, they are really well defended initially. So they have all these layers of defense. They have all this weight, pounds per square inch, that is pressing downward, keeping everything down. So if we were to take a little bulldozer or an earth mover, and if we were to just start little by little scraping away layers of dirt, what would start to happen? Okay, right. Eventually, the power, the upward movement, the upward pounds per square inch is going to become more than the downward or the weight that's keeping everything down. So the more you start your process of uncovering truth, being dedicated to the process, no matter what it takes, of getting to the bottom of this, then each session, little by little, will be scraping away another layer. And what then can you expect? Well, there's going to be like a tectonic shift, right? There's going to be all of a sudden, there's going to be these shifts upward. The entire picture is now starting to move up. That's the challenge, because that's changing, that's shifting things. Okay. And what that means is truth is starting to come closer to the surface. And inevitably, in that process, you will have some of the deeper parts, and we'll describe all this both a little bit tonight and then in future episodes. We're going to take a little childlike part when the defense mechanisms, when the layer of soil, when that permafrost, when you stuffed it in a closet or trap door, meaning the ability to defend and the ability to push down either starts little by little to give way, or a crack in that starts. It's like a fissure. We talked a little bit about that last time. So let's say all of a sudden a downward, a vertical crack happens, then, and this is in time what goes on when therapy progresses, a crack based upon truth. All of a sudden, and the nature of the relationship with the therapist, by the way. If you don't trust your therapist, if your therapist is not engaged, then this isn't going to happen, right? Because this is talk about a personal trainer, right? It's a very personal thing. They're your coach, they're your personal trainer, whatever term you want to use. There's your emotional surgeon. So if you don't have faith in you, if you can't trust the therapist, then find somebody else. But if you know your therapist is competent, then it may be that you're putting the brakes on, which doesn't make you good, better, and different. It just means you're probably putting the brakes on. Okay. But if it starts to go well, meaning if the progression is happening through truth, eventually there will be these cracks that will start to go down in this sense. Truth is going to do its work, and it will bypass the defenses every now and then. And so this is the first time that a therapist will see a childlike part. And it is very noticeable once in the nature of the relationship, the therapeutic rapport, the therapeutic relationship, the client, so if you are the client, all of a sudden a childlike part of you is going to emerge. For the therapist, what they're going to see is a young part, and even facial expression changes and vocabulary changes. Okay. And what they will see is what I saw, right? I suddenly saw Tina with the very first person, we'll call her Mary. And before I knew it, because she and I had established rapport, she was already disclosing horrific abuse. So she was becoming very trusting and very trusted in my work. And a lot of it was the therapeutic rapport. Before I knew it, and I risked asking, right, who am I talking to? So before I knew it, Tina had managed her way up. And she took the place of, in a way, what she did is Mary went down. So this is dissociation. So let's say I started working with Mary. Oh, I've got a little pizza of weight there. There we go. So let's say I started my session with Mary. I'm just going to at 3 p.m. Okay. So Mary and I start talking, and eventually Mary starts going into a memory at, let's say, 3:20. Well, what happens is, as she's starting to go into that memory, in this case, she was going back into that because it was too overwhelming. One of these secondary parts probably was going to take over. Actually, it would have been one of the subconscious parts. Well, what happened, because that's too much, but because she was tapping into a memory, what happened was it was a momentary opportunity. And also, I believe the truth drew it up. And a lot of these parts, this is very true too. You can see this is Word documents I'm able. So what was being shared by Mary was even too painful for it was triggering for a lot of these parts. So they were shutting down. So what that enabled, and probably some of these parts were shutting down. So it enabled Mary to kind of bridge the gap. IFS, by the way, if you can see my little cursor here, I've written down, and again, I recommend IFS, that's internal family systems. They have coined terms. And so when they talk about the managers, they're kind of talking about this level. When they're talking about all this level up here, the current primary parts, the co-conscious and the subconscious. Okay, when they're talking about firefighters, they're talking about this level. Okay. And firefighters are dedicated to making sure that the wounded kids down here, what they call the exiles, and the conscious and subconscious and co-conscious parts, because this is kind of the public part. This is what keeps the person going during the day, during how to keep everything together. So the firefighters or repressed parts, their goal is to make sure that neither the top or the bottom ever connects. So that's why I called it the gatekeepers right here, primary gatekeepers. Okay. We'll go into some of these titles. But when Mary started connecting with a memory, because I think it was so fast, because she was connecting with somebody, it happened to be me, the therapist, that was very disarming because how had Mary been programmed? She was a victim of MK, Ultra, and SRA. And she had about 250 parts. So the one thing the perps were dedicated toward was what? Making sure that Mary never got close to anybody. So woundedness happened through relationship and healing will happen through relationship. And that's why, in a way, what will be recreated in session will be a lot of the dynamics. And that's what we also call borderline personality disorder, as far as, what is it? Meaning that will eventually manifest itself too. Why? Because the hope of relationship or to be known and being known is, this is going to sound, it's intoxicating, meaning it will pull out of me the hope. So hope against hope, but at the same time, it's so scary. So it's back and forth. Frank Anderson of IFS talks about that he's never seen a borderline personality disorder client that's never been traumatized. I concur. So I think what happens in a moment of time, as the relationship is being established, that's drawing parts upward because they long to be known. That's the one thing they've never been able to have is a strong connection with somebody. But they also have to remember, and here's part of the therapy, they have to remember that the therapist isn't your spouse or your best friend. It doesn't make it an invalid relationship. Kind of view it like a coach, view it like gosh, a coach is probably a very, very good analogy. Okay. Also, they're going on safari together, right? There, a tour guide or a safari guide. Okay. But ultimately, you don't pay a friend, you don't pay a family member, but it doesn't mean that it's just strictly professional. But you have to remember that the therapist cannot be your friend, but it doesn't mean that they won't know you the best. Okay, it's like a coach. Think about how many young people, even adults, that had a good coach, that they remember that coach forever, right? Because they played such a pivotal role in bringing the best out of them. So that is the way to view a therapist. So we're here for a reason, but we're not detached. Think about the true coach. True coach is in there. He loves the players like he loves his own kids, but the players aren't his kids. So it's a hard balance, but that's where part of the responsibility of the client comes in, always trying to remember that as close as you get with the therapist, it can't be friendship. Okay, it's like a coach. That's really such a powerful analogy. Okay, so we're here on the sidelines as therapists, meaning you're on the field of play. Let's say American football, NFL. I wear the headset. I'm the coach, but you're calling the plays. And I've also got assistant coaches up there, meaning we can see from different perspective, but you're the one, it's your life. You're in there. We're in there like a dirty shirt, but you've got to be the one that's playing the game. So there we go. Okay. So once truth starts to do its work, at some point in time, probably a number of sessions, we'll think about weeks worth. So probably within a couple of months, if you have a therapist that you can trust, you have a therapist that understands this, then your hope, good hope, and the nature of the relationship, and will allow the defenses to start coming down. And at some point in time, as you're connecting with parts, And again, we're going to kind of focus in here on the upper parts just for a moment. I still want you to see the big picture. What will happen eventually is a part that has been suppressed, a young part that knows some things, is going to find a way. We'll use the American football analogy. We'll do an end run. So that here goes Tina. She's doing an outside run, almost like a linebacker or whatever, right? Or let's say a wide receiver. That's better. So she's zigzagging, right? And she's getting through all this, and all of a sudden, boom, meaning she pops up. And so she now is going to have a chance to talk. So what happens is that energy, as it were, causes the primary presenting person, to dissociate, to duck in. And they don't know it. So they're getting pulled in. They don't know. Okay. So now let's say the session started at 3. We hit 3:20. All of a sudden, Mary's starting to have a memory. Now the question is that starting to leak up? Probably. But at that point in time, it's sending shock waves through the system in this sense. It's too powerful because it's information that's coming from way down in the subconscious, and it's causing almost everybody to dissociate, and except for the gatekeepers. But what's happened is it got through, and it meaning the information, but the information is emanating from Tina. And what Tina does as the 3:20 hits and the memory is starting, all of a sudden she sees the light of day. IFS calls it storming the gates. I just say it's weaving, zigzagging through the defenses, and she comes up. Okay. So if you're a therapist, what you're going to notice is there's a difference in affect and voice inflection, in intonation, in vocabulary. There's going to be a change, very subtle at first, because they don't know that you know. So Tina, is still having to try to share things without coming right out. But if you want to know as a therapist, if you sense enough, I would ask. You can say, who am I talking to? Okay. And the first time that happens, everything will go quiet for a moment because now they know, oh, the gig's up. And I'll tell you what, the entire system is very quiet for a second because now they don't know what's happened. Meaning the gig's up, Tina's out. And so in a way, a lot of parts, especially the gatekeeper ones down here, a lot of them are hearing, especially the internal COO, is because they are the radar operator and suppressor. So Tina got by all these defenses and dropped a truth bomb in a way. So as soon as the therapist asks and as soon as Tina comes up, then as long as Tina knows that Tina is going to be accepted, then the therapist and Tina will be able to have direct communication. But this is now revealing a memory. So when Tina, it's only a matter of time. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit, and we'll talk more about how this happens. But the first time a childlike part that's coming from the wounded kid end of things, okay? And so I just have one green square, but there will be, depending upon the amount of abuse, there will be many, okay? So I've just done one square per kind of category. So this is representative. This could be representative of many. Somebody could have many childlike parts. They typically do, okay? Depending upon when the abuse started. And then as you see here, I've got some backup ones, okay? But are there to help. But there's going to be the first one, the initial one that always wants to get help. All the others have been suffering in silence, but one is going to try to break through. Okay. As a therapist, then I'll still call her Tina. Tina becomes, you're going to establish a relationship with everybody. Frank Anderson, I differ a little bit with him. He says you don't need to establish a primary relationship with each part. I disagree with that. Okay, because every part is a part of the person. For me, when I was working with Mary, Tina and I were great friends in the sense. Tina was invaluable because Tina, everybody else, especially some of these parts, especially that part, they would call her the rat. letting out all the information. She's going to get them in trouble. And that's why they wanted to suppress Tina. Okay, but Tina was my primary source of information. Tina was invaluable. But once Tina finally was able to appear enough times, sometimes there's going to be other little ones. But typically speaking, there's just going to be one or two or fewer because the rest are too scared. Okay, so Tina's a brave little thing. She was only 6. Vocabulary, handwriting will change. Okay, so when that happens, that's when memories will be disclosed. So that's a little bit later, but I wanted you to see how this dynamic process can happen. So the blue right here, we're going to begin to now just focus on the blue, and I'll eventually go through each of these in subsequent episodes. Okay, but again, each circle or square, and I try to differentiate them, represents a type of altar. Okay, and they will all are a part, and they'll all have names generally, but it doesn't have to be people names. It can be something, but each will have its own name. Now, if you're a survivor of SRA, some of the perps likely gave some of these parts demonic names, like Abaddon or Apollyon or Lucifer, or pick your name, Greek names, Roman names. Um, so they've never had a chance. They didn't really have a chance to decide upon their own name, or they haven't had a chance to tap into that. So that'll be part of the process down the line to help each realize they can slough off that cloak that was given to them, that outfit, as it were, that they don't even know. And that's where they begin to have a choice. Okay. So again, just for overview, you have really, this is where you're going in therapy. Oh, let me put Mary back. Okay, so when you go to therapy, you will be here. What'll happen is the goal is little by little, you're going to begin to get to know each of these parts. Cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't focus on trauma-related parts, okay? Because this is not in your head. This is not beliefs. This is trauma, okay? So look at a glance. Here's the goal. Here's where your therapy is going to go. You're going from top to bottom. So you can see there's a journey. Okay. And it would be one thing if it was just you're going to get to know these different squares, or the different squares, right, or circles here. But down here contains the memories you've forgotten and the horror. And so you're not only going to get to know people, but that's a means to an end, because ultimately you need to know what happened and why these parts are here, why every part was created, so that you can be free and so that they can be free, so that you can eventually connect with your core part, that little part of you, the child within. Right now, nobody is free because everybody is persuaded or convinced of things. And so what you have is a lot of deep parts of you that are absolutely convinced of something. And right now, because they're enclosed, as it were, it's like they're in a time capsule. And they have nothing to compare and contrast. They don't know the war is over. It's like a Japanese soldier that on the Philippines that went into that cave that got stuffed away in there, and last orders given were you defend this cave. You don't come out until you're given the order. So they're dutifully in the cave, they're dutifully in their spot, and they're doing dutifully what they are supposed to do, what they were told, but they don't realize the war is over and the concentration camp is now empty. The Nazis left. And so the threats are gone. The reality is now you can finally be free. And you're going to find out how badly you were abused and how badly you were manipulated and tricked. Okay, so that'll be really what's going to set you free. So these are parts that right now have been the old-fashioned term, and it's still an important term. It's a hard term to let it sink in. Everybody in the red and green, quite frankly, except for Tina right now, and probably some of these others, but right here. Um, no, okay. For the vast majority of these in here, we would say they're brainwashed. Now, that sounds a little harsh, so let's just say they were manipulated into believing something that's not true. And now they believe it to be true 100%. And you can't convince them, or at least right now, you can't convince them of the opposite, right? It's this. Don't confuse me with the facts, my mind's made up. That's the challenge, especially in here. So the question is this: how do you ever get their cooperation and permission ultimately? That's where we're going with this too. Okay, because Tina was able to sneak up. She was able to do an end run, and that'll still happen as these memories come up. Okay, but at some point in time, the real crucial part or a big part of therapy is you're going to begin to get to know these different parts and the repressed parts. That's the key or the success of therapy. Because without you getting to know them, and in a way, without them getting to know you, you're never going to help rescue these because they are doing they're doing their job, the last order given, which was what? To never let anybody talk to the wounded kids over here, meaning that title. Never let anybody talk to any of these. Okay. Never, and talk, meaning never let them out. Why? Because they have information. They've got the memories and they have memories of perps. Now, I'm not suggesting you're going to go and file suit or criminal charges, but just the reality, because you may not know someone, you may know someone. Okay. But this repressed parts level, the firefighters, ultimately, this is where true therapy happens. I mean, true therapy is happening all over the place. I mean, the whole time. Okay. But ultimately, it is to get in touch with and get to know them. It's going to take you a while as a therapist. As a client, you have to be patient. Okay. I will now, Carrie, do you have any questions? I'll keep talking here.
Yeah, go ahead. Keep talking. This is
Okay,
great.
there you go. So now I'm going to, so that's kind of the flow. That's where you're going to go. How long could that take? I would say for an SRA or MK Ultra survivor at the pace of minimum twice a week, 2 hours per week, you're looking at a couple of years minimum. I would say probably 3 years. Don't get discouraged with that. Okay. I just want you to be realistic. Why? Because number one, you're human. Number two, you're defended, which makes you human. And it's the more you went through, the longer it takes. But the good news is this: just know there's hope. And so be patient, be prepared, and view it as you're going on a journey. Okay. So that's really, before I block all this out, just so we can continue talking here, that's what this is all about. You're going from top downward and you're going to get to know all of these. And as a matter of fact, okay, I'll do this just real fast because we talked about this last time and this is the place to start. But what I was going to say is, as I pull this down, my poor computer got to catch up here, is the first stage of therapy is you beginning to get to know the parts of you. And so we stopped right here. These are the parts of you that you are hearing during the day. These, and the reason I call them the support team is that's exactly what they are. So what you have been aware of is, and the internal voices is you've been aware of probably no less than 6. It could be a few more. So I just kind of, again, these are sort of the categories. Let me go from left to right. I really should have put them almost in rainbow color from blue to red because it's going to match feelings as well, emotions. Okay, so we've got the primary person, that's you. Why are you considering therapy? Because you're responsible. You know, and somebody may say, no, I'm desperate. You don't understand. Okay, but why are you still doing that? Why don't you just go and drink yourself, silly? Why don't you go, right? The fact that you're listening to Emma's channel, right, says that you're doing the responsible thing. and you want a better life for yourself. I don't meet any client that is lazy. Doesn't matter what they feel like. You aren't doing therapy if you're lazy. Trust me. Okay. Now, it's like somebody that's showing up at the gym saying they're lazy. They're not lazy. They showed up at the gym, right? So here's the primary part. And the one thing that's true is this primary part is overly responsible, but it doesn't feel that way. But it's too darn strong for its own darn good. It's getting to a point where things are breaking down, okay, for probably a lot of different reasons. Now, when things get overwhelming at work, it could either be due to workload or being triggered. And you can be triggered in all sorts of ways. And what'll happen is an equally responsible part that matches, that makes sense to be at work. So to get work done, what'll happen is this part of you, so your subconscious parts, and again, all trauma does is segment our normal personality. So we all have subconscious parts, right? Just under the surface. And we've seen that. One example we used is, let's say, here I am, I'm talking to you. And if one of my pets were to walk in, or let's say we're in a business meeting, and let's say you're a real pet person and you're not mortified that your pet walked in, but you like it, here comes the pet. And so the normal person I'm talking to like an adult, but here comes little Fifi, and I say, oh, I turn, I look at Fifi. No, I'll say Sebastian. And because I like Sebastian, I like all my pets. I'll say, hi, Sebastian, right? My voice inflection changes. So let's say I go, oh, there's my little schnookums. Or all of a sudden, I go from being normal to what? In a split second, I go to being, oh, no, I grabbed me. Wait, hold on. You can tell this is a Word document. All of a sudden, I go, now what we're talking about is, oh, schnookums. And so what's happened? I've got a very playful part of me out talking to the cat. And then once I realize, okay, once cat goes out, maybe say, okay, Schnookums, Fifi, time to leave. So I take the cat, I remove the cat, and now I say, okay, now back, where were we? And so I come back out. Now it doesn't mean, because it depends upon the nature of it, would I remember, if I have parts, I actually wouldn't remember if I've gone through a lot of trauma. Now that sounds funny because here I'm dealing with the cat, but I'm sorry, but that was just to show you we all have parts. Okay. Now let's say during the day, I'm going back to the issue of parts. So that was an example to show you how we each can shift, whether we're traumatized or not. Okay, so now we're going to focus on somebody that's traumatized that has parts. They're getting tired and they can't keep up the momentary for this time of the day. Okay, so a detailed part, or let's say the boss called him and said, hey, where's that report? And now crisis hits because the person's been delaying. Okay, what will happen is they'll get pulled in. Okay, I wish I had two mouses, but simultaneously. So the detailed part, I put a name to that. Let's say Sally or whatever name, Bill. It could also be me, or it could be myself, whatever term. Okay. What happens? So I used to think it was that if I'm the primary part, I duck in. Could still be the case, but I'm more persuaded now that. So let's say we'll say this is Sally. I'm going to give Sally this name, or for the detailed part. What happens is Sally is watching or sensing, or she's very much aware that Mary is starting to lose it. So Sally pulls Mary in. Okay, so Sally now will finish the report. What happens if something happens and Sally gets triggered, but they still have to work on the report? What do you think happens next? Okay. There's another, shall we say, work-related part, for instance. And so now Sally either knows that she's getting tired, or maybe the same kind of dynamic happens. And probably the same dynamic, which is now, say Brenda, if I can remember these names, eventually I'm going to have names. So Brenda now does what? Pulls Sally in. Oh, sorry, I didn't get up. Oh, I flipped her upside down. Okay, sorry. Okay, so there we go. So now Brenda is out. Now remember, this is the same body. Anybody walking by Mary's office or cubicle doesn't know that this internal switching has gone on. And so let's say 3 o'clock, the switching started, and now it is, she gets the report done. And now it's 5 o'clock, and now the pressure's off. And so Brenda has fulfilled her job. And so what happens? She can go back. And there is Mary. I'll just put these back in their original spot there. So now Mary is back out. Mary is amazed. She got the report. As a matter of fact, Mary may not even know. She has to look. She has to double check. She has to check her computer to see if it was sent. But here's the thing. She doesn't remember writing it. She doesn't remember completing it. And now she has to wonder, did she do it right? But she senses from the past, it's always done right, but she has a gap. So again, that is what's going to happen when there is this switching part. So you can then imagine different scenarios where different parts would suddenly pull the other part in. So let's say Mary realizes that she needs to work on boundaries. I'm going to shrink. Okay, that'll be good. So Mary's been realizing that her mother has been a source of consternation, just anxiety, irritation, all that. So Mary decides, okay, you know what? I'm not going to, Christmas was bad enough, and I know Mother's Day is coming up, and I'm not going to be guilted into anything anymore. So she's taking assertiveness training courses. She's going online. She's preparing. And here comes the next time she and her mother are going to be together. And so she is ready, feels she's ready. And she's got her different interventions. And so now she and her mother get together. And it's going okay for the first couple times. Maybe mother always tries to guilt trip her into spending time with Uncle so-and-so, or a bazillion and one things, or go to church and they'll guilt trip. Okay. Meaning people want to dump knapsacks on Mary. And Mary's saying, I'm mad as hell, I ain't going to take it. Actually, this part of her would say, I'm mad as hell, I ain't going to take it anymore. But let's say Mary decides, okay, you know what? I really am going to work on boundaries. And she feels she's prepared, but little does she know, she's going to, she could even say, I'm going to confront, but it could be confronting too soon, out of her hurt rather than her healing. But let's say it's not going to be confrontation this time. It's just going to be setting boundaries, but she's prepared for possible confrontation, but the boundaries will help minimize or mitigate how many sparks there's going to be. Okay, so she now is all prepared. She gets together with mother. She's doing okay until mother knows she's not getting anywhere. Like, she knows there's something different about Mary. So Mary is a thanks, but no thanks. So the first couple of times, mother is surprised that Mary is withstanding the guilt trips. So where Mary used to cave in right away and not put up any pushback, agree, people pleasing, placating, all of a sudden, Mary has said, Mom, you know what? No, I'm not going to do that. Oh, Mom's never heard that before. So mom is surprised, but here's the thing. Mom, being a good sociopath or psychopath or malignant narcissist, she's not going to take no for an answer, and doesn't believe that Mary is serious and has seriously changed, right? So Mother Gothel kind of thing. So what does Mary's mother do? She's going to turn the page on the playbook. She's going to now go to, she was, all mom used to have to do, all mother used to have to do is do first gear approach. Well, first gear doesn't work anymore, the amount of pressure. So all of a sudden she's going to shift to second gear. She's going to turn the page to, or she's going to take out a different playbook, and now she's going to start upping the ante. Well, Mary was sort of prepared for that. And now Mary knows anticipated what mom was going to say, and she withstands the second and third attempt. Well, now mother is not going to be told no, meaning mother is not going to return empty-handed. She's going to get what she wants. She's going to place her knapsack on Mary. So now Mother is going to go there, wherever there is. She's going to shift gears. Now it's third gear. Now it's a new playbook. And Mary wasn't prepared for it. It could be as simple but as powerful as mother saying, well, fine, but you may not see me again. And I'd hate to think that these are our last words together. I don't know. She's trying the guilt trip. And what happens? It's too much. The emotions, the stress, Mary didn't prepare for that. And because there's not rebar in the inside of Mary's soul, so to speak, meaning her backbone, that's not calling Mary names, right? Ultimately, what we want is a sense of internal power, right? Be able to have your own voice. So what happens is, because Mary wasn't prepared, because now mother's going at a deeper level and basically saying, well, one false move and this relationship gets it. So mother went there. What happened? It was too much. It caught Mary off guard. And so Mary is getting so worked up, meaning all the different emotions. Then what happens? The submissive part comes out to ultimately protect Mary. And what does the submissive Mary do? Gives in. And so in a way, what does mother feel? Yep, mother feels satisfied and even more empowered. And now mother believes that if in doubt, she can pull out playbook number 3. And mother's got a lot of different playbooks. Okay. So after mother leaves, or after, right? Because mother's satisfied now. Okay, I knew you would see it my way, or good, fine. It's about time you see the light. And, I knew you would come to your senses, whatever any cult-like mother is going to say. And so now the agreement, and mother leaves, or they hang up the phone. Now the submissive one, because the stress has come back, and now Mary comes out. But what has happened? Mary agreed to something. So I could even write under this one, we've got 2. We could either make this one the guilt-producing one. That usually pessimistic. That usually is the one that when Mary wants to start something pro-growth for herself, start to have hopes and dreams. The pessimistic one is going to come in to quash that. Okay, to keep Mary from getting out of her lane, getting out of her comfort zone. Okay, so that's usually one. But I would probably say this one is the guilt-producing one, because it's defensive, and that could be defensive towards other people, aggressive towards other people, or in this case, so Mary finally says what? Against her better judgment, against her druthers, she finally said yes to her mother again. And who was listening? That's right. So now, because there's no immediate threat, then we're just going to call her, what do we have so far? I'm forgetting names. Let's call her Ruby, because it matches red. Ruby is the really aggressive one, really assertive one, really defensive one. Actually, Ruby doesn't know assertiveness, it's just aggressiveness. And really, it can be really mean, nasty, caustic. It has a heck of a vocabulary, right? A lot of those monosyllabic words, very definite. She doesn't play games, she doesn't mince words. Okay, so she's there to ultimately protect Mary. But when Mary can't protect herself, what happens? Then in that case, let's say if Mary were to have hung in there a little bit more, but felt a little different way, or mom conducted herself, it may have been that Ruby would have stepped in. Same concept, pulled Mary in, and Ruby would have given mother a piece of her mind. And mother would have huffed off. And then Ruby would feel satisfied. But also, here's the thing, Ruby has a love-hate relationship with Mary. Why do you think? Because Mary is viewed by Ruby as a weakling and the source of her problems. Because if it weren't for Mary, if Mary had ever grow a spine, what would happen? Then Ruby wouldn't have to jump in. But Ruby has to always do the heavy lifting. And so Ruby, in a way, dislikes all the other parts, right? Because Ruby has commentary on everybody, especially who? Right? Especially Mary. So that's what Mary comes into session with. She has all these conflicting internal parts, internal voices, internal mixed emotions. And because let's say when mother was talking, you may have the anxious part that came out for a moment. So let's say mom is talking. I'm jumping back here for a second. So mom is talking to Mary, and Mary's feeling all sorts of words. All sorts of ways, hearing all sorts of, as a matter of fact, that's also what's going on. Mom's talking. Well, a whole lot of parts are having commentary on the inside. I should have mentioned that at first. So long before they pull Mary in, they're starting to have commentary. Well, let's also say the dutiful part is the part that goes to church and feels like you need to be a dutiful daughter, right? As a matter of fact, let me now, where is insert shape? So this will be a little bit easier. Okay, we're going to do the communication just for a second here. I think I did this last time, so let me do this just so people can see it. I'm going to color it. What color are we going to do this? Just for the heck of it, I'm going to do it red. Not because they're angry, okay, just so we can see it. Okay, so mom is talking to, as a matter of fact, let me do this live. Okay, you may have any questions while I'm doing this, but this will be important. So I'm going to insert, I'm going to insert a shape already. No, here's what I'm going to do. Okay, I'm going to duplicate. So if anybody wanted to know how to make a chart like this, I'm showing you right now. So cut, paste. Nope, I don't know where that one went. But anyways, okay, I don't even know what that was about. Okay, but let's say, I don't need, okay, I need to stop. Gosh, but let's say I could make another circle over here. My computer's trying to catch up, I think. So we can make another circle. As a matter of fact, I will, right? I can't. Yeah, I can. Hold on. Bear with me. Bear with me. I'm going to move that here. I'm going to move. Nope. Okay, I'm not even going to try it. But let's say we put another circle here for mom. Okay, so mom is talking at Mary. Maybe I can do this. Okay, so here comes the threat. Maybe we'll just do that. And I'm going to enlarge. Bear with me. Everybody bear with me. Okay, so there we go. So if you've ever seen Charlie Brown, you know how you have the teacher? Womp, 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 womp. Okay, so mom is over outside of our view. She is talking to Mary. Okay, as the threat or mom is talking to Mary. I've never done this live. Okay, so we have, right? It's the pressure is coming in here. Mom may be doing a little darts, so to speak, verbal darts, pressure. Then what's happening a lot and simultaneously, so we could draw additional lines. Okay, you have all sorts of parts that are talking to her. As a matter of fact, we probably should draw multiple lines all at once. So we have the submissive part that's starting to say, oh, I need to, the dutiful one saying, well, you need to be a good daughter. The detached one saying, tell mom to screw herself. I could care less. Oh, something bad. I'm getting anxious. Tell her to go screw herself, right? So you've got all this dialogue going on that feels over and above on the inside of Mary. So Mary's hearing this either in one ear or the other, maybe in the back, or sometimes zooming overhead. Okay, so we've got mom talking to her in her ear. So this is best I can do for right now. Okay, mom's trying to pressure her, poke, 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 poke. And meanwhile, we've got all these different zoom, 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 you know, all the, it is real, right? We got 87,000 voices going on. And then also, wait, this is true. Sorry. So let's say, who do we call this? Ruby is the angry one. Let's say the submissive one is starting to talk. All of a sudden, it's not directly towards it. Now the angry one is talking to the submissive one saying, shut up, right? Shut your mouth. No, we're not going. And so Mary's hearing the dialogue between Sally and the submissive one, or maybe the dutiful one. We could actually add the spiritual one. Oh, now it's, you know, now we got including Bible verses. Well, this one's saying, to hell with that. There is no God. And you know what? All religion is man-made. Shut up. And this one's saying, no, you know what? You need to work on the fruit of the Spirit. Gosh. And then the helpful one is, I think we'll just make cupcakes. And this one's saying, to hell with your cupcake. We're not doing the detached one. Nobody can get anything on the detached one. That doesn't care. They're saying, I'm going to go drink. And the playful one, actually, the playful one's ducking out of there. So you've got all this stuff you've got between each of the parts of the alders. And so that's kind of zooming around or over and above the person. So Mary's hearing all this internal dialogue. And then each one also, so Ruby is talking to others and talking to Mary, all in like almost instantaneously. So as mom is running her mouth, what's going on for Mary? She not only has the normal human pressure, but she's got all this dialogue going on between the parts and towards her. And so, how much pressure is Mary feeling? And so, what does Mary finally do? Like, the anxiety gets so much that maybe what happens is, so we're just going to choose one, is all of a sudden, now let me get out of that. All of a sudden, let's say a different scenario. All of a sudden, Ruby says, you know what? Damn it, get out of the way. I'll tell you, mother. And now, wait, this is going to be funny. All of a sudden, Ruby turns, this is good. Ruby starts doing what to mom? Giving it to her. Changes it. Well, Ruby feels, let's say that one worked. Okay, so I've just kind of changed the scenario. So now Ruby's firing all these arrows. And Ruby finally says, there, that's how you get it done. And so I've just changed the scenario. So let's say Ruby's had enough and Ruby's been shooting. Oh, where'd the dart go? I don't know. Oh, okay, there. Ruby gives it back. And everybody else now is quiet, right? Because they can't believe it. There's just stark silence. And then mom goes out in a huff. Mom's got tears, whatever. And then Ruby doesn't care, right? The detached one says, I don't care. I'm going to go drink anyways. Okay. Now the submissive one has all sorts of guilt. The anxious one is, I don't, no, there's going to be a curse as well. And I didn't honor my mother and father. The playful one is saying, oh, sorry, here's a playful one. This is a bad day. I just want to go play. These two are mortified, quite frankly, and now they've got all sorts of shame and guilt. But now when mom slams door, it gets off the phone, good, stress is gone, problem is gone, and Mary comes back out. Does Mary even know? We're kind of doing more, this could be also more unconscious, but let's pretend that there still isn't, Mary hasn't learned about co-consciousness. She's not at that stage where Mary is aware of them. Okay, that's the defining difference. So right now, these lower parts, see, every part can see themselves, it knows themselves, and the next levels up. So right now, Mary is consciously unaware other than the voices. But when she gets pulled in, that's the amnesia, as it were. That's the dissociation. So she got pulled in very dramatic fashion by Ruby. Ruby is feeling very satisfied. But when Ruby was out, neurochemically, what does Ruby have? Well, she has all the anger. When you are angry, you're producing adrenaline. Adrenaline feels like anxiety. That's what we call anxiety. So in the body, there's been a release of adrenaline, which makes you feel what? Makes you feel anxious. So we have Mary, who isn't aware of, the last thing she knew, she was talking to her mother, but she's looking around and wonders where mom went, or looking at the phone, and the conversation ended. So Mary knew the start of it. She doesn't know how it ended, but all of a sudden, Mary feels what? Mary feels, whoa, we've got well, she's feeling anxious, number one, because of the adrenaline, but now she starts to hear. So that's probably a better way to put it. She feels anxious, but now that it's calm, we could go back to the communication now. Now there's going to be a lot of silence from some of these. Detached doesn't care. That's just to help numb out, quite frankly. She cares, right? But this is the one who will always, if she overpowers things, she's going to go on a binge, or she's going to everything. I mean, any kind of compulsion or addiction in a way. Okay. Or she's going to eat herself silly. She's going to smoke a bunch. She's going to, right, to where she just doesn't care. Or the playful one might come out. I'm sorry, I was trying to grab the move the playful one. Okay, so once Mary comes back out, And Emma, I'm aware of the time, so maybe this will be enough. It's kind of a review from last time, and we didn't start to, but hopefully that was helpful. And next time we'll jump into more of it. Okay. Um, so Mary now is left with having an awareness that mom and I were having a conversation, but the last thing I know or the last thing I remember is, okay, so now there's a gap. And she just has a feeling because the last time this happened, it didn't go well because she wants to follow up with mom. Or let's say she's not following up with mom. Maybe Mary says, oh, and what happened there? I don't even know what that. So something new. What does that say? Something. I don't know. Maybe I ended up. Oh, that was from a previous. Okay. No, Department of Corrections. Nope, we're not going to put Mary in prison. I don't know where that came from. Well, let me get rid of that. I don't know where. Wow, isn't that funny? Okay. But anyways, so okay, so there's Mary again. So that's the dutiful Mary up here. So all she knows is this. The last thing she knew was she and mom were talking. It was starting to get awkward. And now she looks and mom's not in the room, meaning mom's not in the house. Mom left or mom hung up. So she has a sense, Mary has a sense that things may not have gone well because whenever that's happened in the past, things didn't go well. So Mary has a choice. Mary can either buy time, pretend it's nothing bad happened, and just wait it out, or she can double check. Let's say she decides to wait it out. Wait what out? Wait for mom to call. Well, the longer she waits, the more time goes by. Now she has a sense because mom usually calls by now. And so Mary begins to realize, oh, something happened. So who has to be the one to make the first call? Okay, and this is where part of the problem happens, right? And who does that tick off on the inside? That's right, Ruby, because Ruby's saying, screw it, don't call her. You don't need to call her, but that's internal communication. So Mary calls, Mary hears now what happened, what came out of her mouth, her lips, but it was really whose words, right? And Mary doesn't remember any of it. And now Mary has a choice. She can either say, I don't remember, but that's not a good thing because every time she said that in the past was mother say to Mary, or she can pretend that she knows and then just fake it like, well, you did deserve it, mom, or I'm sorry, I didn't know what came over me. Or she can try to tell mom, I never said that, you're crazy. Okay, one of three options. But mom has known her long enough and vice versa, so it usually is going to go back into a cycle. It's usually Mary that's going to apologize. So this is a never-ending cycle. And the question is, how has that been going for you? So the only way for this to stop, for Mary to stop feeling guilty, for Mary to stop losing track of time. Now, at first, it's still going to happen as far as losing track of time, is to find out what's been happening. And that's, again, getting to know the parts. And the parts know Mary better than Mary knows the parts, or the parts know you, okay, because they have been helping you. Now, it may not seem like Ruby is much of a help. Trust me, Ruby has the hardest job in a way. Now, that doesn't minimize everybody else. I know some of the dutiful ones said, oh, yeah, well, you tried to. Okay, but each play a crucial role in helping. It doesn't matter what it feels like. That's what they're doing, because if they didn't care, they ultimately, even the detached one, right? If anybody seems like they don't care, it's detached. But all of them, in a way, are there to help Mary's anxiety. So they, deep down inside, this will be maybe information for each of them. In a way, they're very caring and sacrificial. You don't sacrifice on behalf of someone if you don't care about them. So maybe we'll stop there. Emma, do you have any questions at this point?
I don't. I think that this was a very informative presentation that you put together. That's awesome. You did a great job explaining all of these pieces.
Okay, well, next time we'll start to go, we'll pick up at this point, so I won't go into any previous, I won't review. other than the chart. And then, so the next one, if anybody has any questions, they can submit it once this episode is up. But then we will then begin to look at what's the relationship. You notice it's still blue. So this is going to be really a day in the life of a person. But the subconscious ones are aware of the support team here, but the support team isn't necessarily aware of the IFS managers, the suppressed parts. And we'll also talk about, so we'll probably start with this. So in therapy, so you know what, maybe we'll start with this. So where do you begin then? Because you're going to have to get to know. So Mary goes into therapy and her work is going to be getting to know each of them. So how do you begin that process of communication? How's that?
Excellent. I'm excited for that. All of this is really important. I think it gives people who have gone through this type of trauma an idea, like you said, just what to expect and sort of to ease some of their anxieties that they get from thinking about therapy, and also to discern when they finally do, or if they do go seek that route, to understand better what their therapist should be looking for or doing with them, and sort of like what the goals are versus going in kind of blind and maybe, spending a certain amount of time with one therapist just to find that it doesn't work and then going to the next one. I think this can also give tools in people's toolbox to help find a good fit quicker, faster, by understanding what questions to ask, what to sort of look for, what to understand about your therapist. You give great information about a couple of things to look for, credentials, and, things that they should be aware of. So I really appreciate you presenting on this information, because I think from all angles, it's very, very helpful to people who listen, to help understand this process, whether you're a survivor or whether you're an advocate or somebody, wanting to learn. These visuals and this breakdown is really, really helpful.
Well, we're just getting underway as far as now we'll pretend everybody's starting therapy and what's it going to be like? Where do you go from there?
Yes, absolutely. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover today?
I think that'll do it. For but the mind can absorb only what the body can tolerate and listen to. So everybody, if they've still been with us, then they've probably had enough at this point in time.
That's so true. I wanted to bring up your unless you have it up right away, your website.
The websites, I don't. I could if you want, but
okay, here we go. You want to tell people where they can find you, and
there's kind of three primary or three sites. One primary site that is survivorsupport.net, and that has a lot of information about trauma and about parts, and it gives a lot of scientific information about it, as well as very practical things. Under the Insights tab, it's going to give you a lot of my, I call it soundbite curriculum, little thoughts, a lot of which was posted online. That's kind of how I use social media, quite frankly, as ways of prompting and provoking thought, not provoking just seeing sparks fly or challenging people for the heck of it. So under Insights, you can see how it progressed. Originally, I just wanted to put how someone can begin to understand trauma, but then I thought, and you can see the hindrance to healing and then emotion. Then I thought, you know what? They also then need to know about the toxic people. And then it progressed from there, family dynamics, and then characteristics of manipulators. And then I thought, you know what? I'm going to let people know from my work with inmates, work with predators and perpetrators. And that's where the rest really developed from. There are a few tabs down there you can see about the trans movement. I'm not anti-trans. I want people to understand. Next to churches, churches are the #1 hunting ground of predators. The trans movement is #2. So people need to be aware that there are more sharks per square inch in the trans movement just next to churches. There's a lot of sharks in churches. So if you are in the trans movement, you're swimming with sharks. It's as simple as that, because without porn and its influence and those that are using it to groom people and they're dumbing down your intuition, they're going to sexually groom you. And that's why they're going to, and therapists as well. It's diabolical. I've heard too many examples of trans therapists actually manipulating and sexualizing clients. And some even moved in with their therapist. It's just, and it's not the client's fault. And by the way, if that happens, you need to report your client. No therapist should be having sex with a client. Okay, it's not the client's fault. I just want everybody to know. Every therapist knows it is against their licensing, against ethics, and it is potentially illegal. Okay, just like a teacher should not have sex with students. Okay, there's a power differential. So it is against licensing ethics and parameters and again, illegal. So if your therapist has sexualized your relationship, and I'll just leave it at that, but certainly sex, anything sexual, you need to report them. You need to realize you're being used because the therapist should know better. Okay, I'm not saying that two people, because it's a very intensive process, but there are parameters. And I forget, each state has a time frame that, let's say a therapist and a client really do fall in love. Okay. But I think the therapist has to stop working with the client, and then there has to be a number of years that go by before a relationship can be established. And that's really important. And that doesn't mean that the therapist should continue communicating. So if it's real, then it will last a number of years. And then somehow you two can, get back together or get together. But I forget what number. I think it's a minimum of 2 years. Okay, so it's really important. So I sort of digress with that. But I recommend for any kind of healing under the podcast tab, that's the podcast that I do live on Friday nights, 8 to 9 p.m. On the homepage, there's a link. But right now, I'm doing a series on forgiveness. I recommend everybody watch that, not because it's me, and it'll all link to, YouTube. And so what I've done is I've organized that on my YouTube. I'm sorry, I've taken all the ones that pertain to the journey to healing and organized those on the website. So if you don't want to have to bother watching any of these, but you'll see all the different topics I cover on here. And there's my first try at those little brief videos, and I thought I don't even want to spend time. So it's very funny, the shorts or whatever they call those.
Yeah.
But you can see intermixed in this, you'll see some of the journey to healing ones, but then you'll see the other one, the blue and the red that look like a news broadcast. That's the other site, Unmasking the Trans Movement. And that's a great resource. I think it's being really shadow banned because that is a no nonsense, really fact-based, fact-packed site for people. So unmaskingthetransmovement.com or the YouTube by the same name. So those are those. And then the last one, so there's Unmasking the Trans Movement. And again, YouTube by the same name. And then the last site is Church Protect, all scrunched together, churchprotect.org. And that's my training site. So there's myths and truths. Insights tab is really just me screenshotting what I've been doing on social media. And that has a lot of it is training oriented as far as helping educate people. The very top little sub tab, when called to do hard things, that talks about when I was a whistleblower against the Department of Corrections in Pennsylvania. You can read about that. And then under the Truths tab, that is where my own research is put. I don't have peer-reviewed academic yet. I have peer-reviewed professional at the highest levels of the Department of Corrections, plus even a professor from Stanford. So if you scroll down a little bit, I'm really pleased with this one right there. So Leanne Williams was kind enough. So she's with Stanford. So that's pretty good academic review right there. So she's a director and professor of the Center for Precision Mental Health and Wellness. So that was neat. And then Judith Riesman and I worked together. She gave kudos. So, but as someone continues to scroll down, you'll see a lot of, and depending upon the device you use, if you use a phone, you won't see words over on the side. I use a PC all the time, and you click on one of those, the whole screen will scroll, and it'll take you to my research, sort of, unless it's broken, but it should. And intermixed or interspersed will be emails. You may want to try one of the other little buttons. Let's see if it scrolls automatically. It really should. Okay, there you go. Don't get seasick then when it scrolls. There you go. And each one of those, by the way, I have one of my charts under each of those. So if anybody wanted to see the charts I put together from my work with the sex offenders, I've been doing sex offender treatment for 15 years now. Just started my 5th weekly group. So I'm immersed in that, but I've worked with guys extensively within the prison system. And then I have a blog. It's survivorsupport.us. I haven't been able to add to the blog in a while, but it still has a lot of intensive stuff there. And that'll be a link there, right there. It's ordered under this tab. It's ordered by frequency of clicks. So the rest, what you'll find, has to do with predators right there. So those are all resources. These are all labors of love, quite frankly, because I really want people to understand, the harms that psychopaths and sociopaths and narcissists do, and how best to heal. So those are the 3 sites: survivorsupport.net, churchprotect.org, and I'm asking the trans movement, and then the blog survivorsupport.us.
And don't forget Twitter.
Oh, Twitter. There you go.
Yep.
You probably see I'm slowing down a little bit because I'm trying to organize my life, because I'm starting to get ready to do some writing.
Yay. It's tough keeping up with a lot of platforms. It really is. It's something I struggle with.
I can't do it.
Oh my gosh, it's really hard.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I really commend you for, all these different projects that you do, because man, it's tough to keep up with just one, and you have all these different topics and all these different types of people, and it's awesome. But I don't blame you for, it's hard to keep up with all of them when you don't have a whole team working for you, helping manage it.
Well, working a solo.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
I appreciate it, John.
Emma, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure working with you, meeting with you.
Yes.
As we're doing this series here.
It's terrific, and it's so good for my audience. This is a topic that it's heavily requested and needed. We're learning about these stories. The testimonies are giving us the information on what sort of happens behind the scenes firsthand, but we also need to understand how to heal. We need solutions, and we need the antithesis of destruction and abuse and perpetration and mind control. We need people on the other end of that teaching how to reverse engineer all of that, and to redefine who we are as humans, and actually learn about our bodies and our minds. So I thank you for your work out in the field, being on the battlefield every day. I know that you're not always liked by perpetrators who want this all covered. You go against the grain in a lot of ways, and I commend you for that, because it's not an easy task. You don't have to do any of this. You could have easily just kept it private, or even not ventured down this route like a lot of people in your shoes. So I thank you, John. You're very courageous. You're very brave, and we have a lot to learn from you, whether you're a survivor or on the therapeutic end. So I appreciate you coming on.
Well, welcome. I look forward to continuing.
Absolutely. And for people listening, I will have all John's links in the show notes. I have a playlist for John. He has been a regular on the show now, so I have all of his episodes together for you in one file. I will have that in the show notes also. I encourage you guys to go dig into those episodes, go back and re-listen to this. I know it was a lot of information. John's episodes are some that you can go listen to over and over again, and pick up new things every time. Check out his channels, his YouTube. As you saw, tons of videos, hours and hours and hours and hours of content for you guys for free. Same thing on his website. If you prefer reading and like that route, he has amazing blog where you guys can find tons of information there. The insights tabs, like he said, go through tons of different topics for you. Again, hours and hours and hours of free content. So go support John, go follow him across all platforms, follow him on Twitter to keep up sort of with the day-to-day, what interviews he's doing, what he's posting on his channels. You guys can keep up with his day-to-day operations there, and then check out his channels for stuff that you can take your time on. So please go connect with John, you guys. I'll have all of my links in the show notes as well. I appreciate you guys so much for listening as always. Thank you guys for hanging out. Thank you guys for your voracious capacity to learn and your passion for learning about these hard truths of the world. You know, that again is something people turn their backs to a lot. So we really appreciate you guys hanging in with us and your curiosity and your passion to learn. Connect with us. Thank you guys for listening. God bless you, and we will see you next time.